Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to Back to the Father on this beautiful Friday afternoon. And my name is Dave Palmer, along with Cecil Anderson. And if I look like I'm really excited today, it's because I am. First of all, we get to do Back to the Father, and we get to talk about God and divine mercy and all kinds of cool things. And you also might notice that our studio looks different. The whole look of the program looks different, and that's because it is. We're doing a lot of upgrading and changes to our studios, not only here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but across the GRN, because the video, the podcasting aspect of broadcasting is becoming increasingly important. And so things are going to continue to improve, but everything has changed. And so it's really cool. And I want to thank, I don't know if Joe Loney is still in the studio or not, but Joe Loney is Ken Loney, our chief engineer's son. And Joe has been working just tirelessly for the last, several days. And he has really just completely transformed this entire studio. And so I thank him, I thank Kent, and I thank leadership for investing the money and the resources into making our broadcasts look even more professional than they did in the past. And so let's take a look at Cecil's camera. We'll go to Cecil Anderson on the other side of the glass, and Cecil is kind of controlling all the cameras. I want to see what you look like on your camera because, we're going to have to probably make a better background and maybe
there's a lot of things. This is very much the debut, so it has a lot of work.
Right. Okay. So there you go.
Like, for instance, we didn't have our intro, and I just discovered that right before we discovered it,
Yeah.
A flaw in the slaw. It happens.
Are you able to put the slides up on the screen?
Yes. I admittedly realized that we haven't officially tested it, but I'm going to try it in just a second. So I'm going to go back to you.
You're not okay.
If I'm a little harried, it's because I am, but it's great.
Me a lot of confidence there, but that's okay. This is our, like I said to Joe a moment ago, this is the maiden voyage, and as long as it's better than the Titanic's maiden voyage, I think that we're going to be okay, all right? If we stay alive, if we get through the program, it's only going to get better from here. So anyways, welcome to Back to the Father. This is a program that is entirely dedicated to the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas and the Summa Theologia, and I want to just see if we are able to put our PowerPoint presentation up there on the screen, and we will see if that is at all possible or not.
It's looking a little
shaky.
No, it's there. It's just looking a little rough. That's
all.
It's
that does look pretty rough.
Everyone's just getting to see it all in live right now, because I realized because we just switched these computers over, there's things I forgot that I have capabilities on some computers, not on this one. Aha! Okay, Instagram is just going to have to, unfortunately, not really have it. So we'll try to go back and forth pretty frequently, I think.
Okay, so PowerPoint, yes? No.
PowerPoint, yes, but yes.
Okay,
yes,
so PowerPoint
I'll just say yes
is
confidently.
Good. All right, well, let's move forward. And again, thank you for joining us. Back to the Father here. And today is Friday, April 5th. And so Saturday, in 2 days, we're going to celebrate Divine Mercy Sunday. And, Divine Mercy as a devotion, as a novena, as just kind of a thing in the Catholic Church has just exploded really only in the last 2 decades. Saint Faustina, who received the message of divine mercy, she died in 1938. She was canonized in the year 2000. She was the very first canonized saint of this millennium by John Paul II. I think he did that very deliberately. This is something that the church is emphasizing very, very much, is God's mercy, especially on poor sinners. And I thought it would be interesting to look at St. Thomas Aquinas' teachings on divine mercy. Now, he obviously lived and wrote 750 years ago, and so he did not have the advantage of knowing what Jesus, revealed to Sister Faustina. And so let's just kind of see how they compare and contrast. And I don't think there's ultimately any big contradiction between them, although it's a very different approach. And so anyways, we're going to kind of look at a few of these articles of the Summa and also talk about kind of the modern way that the church is going about describing divine mercy, and I think it's kind of interesting. So anyways, I've got an image here of the divine mercy image and the Bible, and Sissel, you're kind of a baby Catholic, and so you probably don't remember any time in the Catholic Church when divine mercy wasn't a thing.
Right.
I can go. I mean, I only really came really actively involved in my faith in the last 25 years or so. But I do remember the first time somebody said they wanted to pray a Divine Mercy Chaplet. And I remember so vividly, I was at St. Monica Church, and I was with the Young Sirens. It was a singles group, and I was single at the time. And they said, okay, everybody get your rosary out. We're going to pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet. And I just remember like, wow, this is really repetitious. That was my first impression. It's just like we just keep repeating and repeating and repeating. I mean, the rosary is repetitious, but at least the prayers are longer, right?
Right.
And so it's just like keep saying the same thing over and over again. And I just kept an open mind about it, and I was very excited about my Catholic faith, and I was like, well, okay, all right, I guess this is a thing, So what about you? What has this particular devotion meant to you, or, as a, relatively new Catholic, what do you think about Divine Mercy?
Yeah. Honestly, like the year after, I think actually the year I came into the church, I'm pretty sure was the year that Pope Francis made it the year of mercy. So I've had mercy as part of I think that was 2016. Was the year of mercy. And so, the theme of mercy has been around for a long time, and the Chaplet of Divine Mercy. I remember when my parents were kind of like showing us the rosary and like, okay, this is something we're going to do now. I remember being like, what's that shorter one again? Like, can we do the shorter one?
Oh, yeah.
The chapel?
Yeah.
It was just so bad.
My kids used to do that as well. They'd say, instead of praying the rosary, can we do the Divine Mercy Chaplet, right?
Now, I will say, I feel like my whole childhood, even when I wasn't Catholic, I was very aware of the image of Jesus, the Divine Mercy image with the blue and the red coming out. That to me always was like, that's Catholic.
Yeah.
So I would associate that with just as much as like seeing Our Lady of Guadalupe. I would see the Divine Mercy image. It's something I've very much known about my entire time. So I've never known life without Saint Faustina. I mean, my life as a Catholic without Saint Faustina and Divine Mercy. I don't think I had a great concept of what it truly meant, and I think it's something I'm still working on learning, because I haven't read her diary. I've only done some little devotions myself, so I think there's a lot more to kind of go into.
I'm trying to think, most of my life has been dominated, with the papacy of John Paul II. I mean, that was such a legendary papacy, and he was pope for about 26 years or so. Then, of course, we had Benedict, and we had Francis. But really, I'd say in the last 30 years or so, obviously the most important thing doesn't change. You have the Kerygma, you have the death and resurrection of our Lord, and the Eucharist and the Mass, and those things have not changed. But as far as kind of like new devotions, new things that have come about, I would say the three that come to my mind that have been really, really strong, first is Divine Mercy. Second is theology of the body. Of course, that's directly related to Pope John Paul II. It's very much an emphasis on the body. And then the third one, I'd say that's relatively new, has been the devotion to Saint Therese of Lisieux, because she was canonized and then also declared a doctor of the Church back, I think, in the early the 90s, perhaps late 90s. And so those are things that really have taken off, so to speak. And so I want to, when we go to the next slide, also kind of make a connection between this whole idea of divine mercy, especially as the church is emphasizing it these days, and also our response, and what our response is, being merciful to other people. And St. Thomas Aquinas is definitely going to highlight that as well. So there's a slide here where I have an image of Saint Faustina. And I also have an image of Divine Mercy. And, we have a buddy, Daniel da Silva, who has an entire apostolate directed to what he calls the Original Divine Mercy Institute. And there is, I guess, some story behind, what exactly did who pay? I guess there's not a controversy, but what does the Divine Mercy image look like? Because the one I have on the screen is very different than the one that a lot of people will have on their wall in the living room. Do you see what I'm saying here, Sissel?
Yeah. The ones that we have are on our walls, I think, are a lot more polished.
Yeah, but I know this is what they call the Original Divine Mercy image. And there's also, and I know Daniel would say that the divine mercy image was painted in Lithuania and not in Poland, although Sister Faustina was Polish, but she went down to Lithuania. So there's all these, historical aspects to it. But I'll just, read this, and then I want to go straight into Aquinas. It says, divine mercy is when God's love meets us and helps us in the midst of our suffering and sin. In fact, because this side of eternity, we're all sinners, and because suffering is our lot in life, God's love for us here always takes the form of mercy. Now, what you're going to find as we get into St. Thomas Aquinas's teaching on God's mercy is that, and this is probably the thing that surprised me the most, is in the question that directly says, God in mercy, he never mentions the word sin. Okay. Now this is important. Okay. And again, I'm not trying to point out like there's contradictions. I think it can all be put together. It can all make sense together, but he uses the word defects, and not sin. Okay. Okay, so then we'll go on here, but based on revelations to St. Faustina and mercy towards others, there are various elements of this devotion. The feast of divine mercy, the image of divine mercy, the chaplet, the hour of mercy, the spreading of the devotion of divine mercy. So there's a lot of different aspects to this devotion, and there's a lot going on, and it's very new as well. St. Faustina was a mystic who had many visions of Christ. These are recorded in her diary, which she was urged to keep by her confessor. Jesus entrusted her with the mission of proclaiming to the whole world the truth of divine mercy. And I don't know if you know this. I have her birth and death dates there. Do you know she only lived to be 33 years old?
I knew she was young. I didn't realize how young, though, she was when she died. That's crazy.
Yeah, 33 years old, she died, and she was canonized April 30th of the year 2000. Okay, so this month, but the year 2000. So, this is only 24 years old. And the Feast of Divine Mercy being the Sunday after Easter, that's only 24 years old. Okay, I remember that kind of being rolled out, so to speak. And so again, it's for people, we have short memories, but there was certainly a time in the history of the church, a long time, in many people's lives who are alive today, like myself, when we didn't have this devotion. It wasn't even around. It wasn't a thing. And so we want to kind of ask the question about why is it that the church and Jesus, through the private revelation to Sister Faustina, felt it was necessary to kind of go beyond perhaps the traditional teachings of divine mercy, and why at this time in the history of the church, the history of the world, did God really feel that he had to emphasize this aspect? Now, I'll show you something kind of interesting. On the next slide, Sissel, is a question number 99 of the Suma, okay? And this is interesting because it is the very last question of the Suma, and I think we have talked about this before, one time before. Okay, so if you go all the way through the Suma, you have you have prima pars, secunda, prima secunda, Suma, secunda secundae, and then tertia pars. Those are the four main parts. And then after Thomas stopped writing, it's called the supplement. Okay, that's what was supplementarily added after Thomas quit writing and died. The very, very last question of the entire Summa, before there's a little appendix, there's these appendices that talk about purgatory and a few things. This is it. Okay, so this is basically the last question in the entire Summa. And it's interesting, in light of the popular notion of divine mercy today, the way that Thomas asked these questions. And so I'm just going to go through these really quickly. He says in Article 1, whether by divine justice an eternal punishment is inflicted on sinners. Okay, and he says, yes. Okay, so you're thinking like, wow, where's the mercy there? But he's saying, yes, those who die in a state of mortal sin will be punished eternally. Okay, so that's Article 1. Number 2 says, well, what about whether by God's mercy all punishment of the damned, both men and demons, comes to an end? I mean, does it ever come to an end? I mean, certainly there's some element of mercy, like they're not going to just kind of be in pain and agony forever and ever and ever eternally. And Thomas says, oh, sorry, they will be. Okay, so this is under his section on mercy and justice. And then it almost reminds me of that story of like, gosh, what was it when was it Abraham kind of negotiating with God, right, about what if there's 25?
Oh, without Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah,
for
like
sure.
what about if there's 20 and
What if there are 20 people
15?
who are, faithful to you? Will you not destroy it then?
Yeah, so
It
that's
kept going down till being like basically no one.
yeah, like what if there's a half a person? So Article 3, he's saying, well, okay, are you only talking about like angels and not really men? And that's what he's saying here. Whether God's mercy suffers at least men. I mean, like, at least you're not talking about like human beings here, are you? And Thomas says, nope, I'm talking about human beings. No, they will be punished eternally. I'm sorry, I'm not laughing at the people who are punished eternally. I'm just saying that, okay. And then the next one says, okay, what about Christians? Are Christians, I mean, if they die in mortal sin, certainly do they get punished eternally? And Thomas says, yep, even the Christians. And then the last one is really interesting in light of this whole topic of mercy. And again, he keeps going further and further and further. And he says, what about those who perform works of mercy? Are they going to be punished eternally? And Thomas says, yep.
Could have predicted that one, I think.
Yeah, and so what he's basically saying is that in this whole question number 99, he's saying if you die in a state of mortal sin, objectively speaking, you're going to hell. Okay, and it doesn't matter if you're a human being and not an angel. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian or an atheist. It doesn't matter if you have works of mercy on your resume. You're still going to go to hell, and you're going to see. And then you're thinking like, wow, where's the mercy there, right?
By the way, we have Amy watching on YouTube, and she's like, man, he was hardcore. She's like, act now.
Yeah, but that's the thing that I want to I wanted to start with that because I think his position really, like, I don't know if I'd say softens, but I think that a lot of people who have a qualm, I guess you could say, with this whole divine mercy, devotion, sometimes think like, okay, but people still go to hell because there's that whole, dare we hope that, hell is empty, And I think, and again, I don't want to by any means give the impression that I'm criticizing the divine mercy devotion because I'm not. I follow the church, and when the church declares something, I follow it. And so, but at the same time, we have to also keep in mind the justice of God. Okay, so and thank you for that comment, Amy. I really appreciate you commenting. And if anybody else is out there and you want to comment on any of the platforms that you're watching right now, please do. So, all right. So now let me go a little bit more into Thomas's teaching, and I think it's going to not sound quite so harsh. In fact, I really like the way Thomas teaches about God's mercy. And I think it kind of sets the stage where, 750 years later, the church is going to kind of hone in on this beautiful part of God's being, right? So on the next slide, it says whether mercy can be attributed to God. Okay, now it's important to know that this is early on in the Suma. The very first part of the Suma, as I explained to Keith on Morning Joy the other day, Thomas is very interested in explaining who God is, okay? God is simple. He's good. He's perfect. He's infinite. He's eternal. God, we know God is love. Well, so he asks this question, can mercy be attributed to God? And then he quotes, Psalm 110, he is a merciful and gracious Lord. So there's your answer, right? We don't have to go any further than that. But I'm going to read this paragraph, and we're going to kind of dissect it a little bit because it's interesting what he says. He says, mercy is especially to be attributed to God, as seen in its effect, but not as an affection of passion. In proof of which, it must be considered that a person is said to be merciful as being, so to speak, sorrowful at heart, being affected with sorrow at the misery of another as though it was his own. Hence it follows that he endeavors to dispel the misery of this other as if it were his. Okay, compassion. And this is the effect of mercy. To sorrow, therefore, over the mercy of others belongs not to God, but it does most properly belong to him to dispel that mercy, whatever be the defect we call by that name. Now, defects are not removed except by the perfection of some kind of goodness, and the primary source of goodness is God. All right. Did everybody get that?
Oh, totally. Yep, 100%.
Sissel's like, I got this. Okay?
All over it.
So here's what he's saying. Okay, so if there's anybody out there and you want to try to summarize what Aquinas just said, I do this when I teach the high school students, and it's amazing. And of course, they're a captive audience. You know, they got to be in class because they're taking the class.
They're quite literally held captive. Yes.
But yeah, they really are. But it's so okay. So if you want to take a stab at this, let me kind of explain what he's saying here. He's trying to protect the fact that God does not change. Okay, and when we, like, let's say. Sissel said to me right now, like, oh, I've got this horrible migraine headache.
How'd you know? How did you know?
because you're learning the Suma. And that's what happens when people learn the Suma, right?
Yes.
And all of a sudden, I in one moment I'm like, happy and I'm teaching the Suma, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh gosh, I'm so sorry, Sissel. So I'm having a mercy and like pity on you, but I've changed, okay? Because my whole disposition has changed. And so what Thomas is saying here is that doesn't happen to God. God doesn't change, and God doesn't have the passion of mercy where he's like, oh gosh, I was having such a great day as God, and now all of a sudden, oh, I'm so merciful to these people, and it just breaks my heart, Now Jesus could have, as a human being, a divine person, I should say, could have felt these passions, but he's talking about God here, divine mercy. But he's saying that God still wants to have a remedy for our misery, okay? But he's not feeling the passion. He's not like, okay. So hopefully that makes sense, all right? But that means that in his goodness, he wants to dispel us of our misery, okay? So that's mercy, okay? That's mercy. So the next slide. It says, it must, however, be considered that to bestow perfections appertains not only to the divine goodness, but also to his justice, liberality, and mercy, yet under different aspects. Now, this is one of the more challenging things to understand about God, is that, when Moses went up in the mountain and he said, okay, God said, go to Egypt and, set my people free. And God said, well, who should I say sent me? And God said famously, tell him I am, right? So God is existence. God is justice. God is mercy. God is he is, all his attributes are the same thing to him, but we kind of parcel them out and say, okay, in this regard, he's being just. In this regard, he's being merciful. In this regard, he's being, this. But that's only from our perspective. Because to God, it's all the same thing, okay? You could say that his justice and mercy are basically one and the same. It's all, does that make any sense? Or I don't know if Amy's still here, if that makes sense to Amy. But it's all the same. It's only a different aspect of the same thing from our perspective, okay? Okay, so he goes on in the next one. He says, whether in every work of God there are mercy and justice. Okay, and he quotes Psalm 24, all the ways of the Lord are mercy and truth. Okay, so again, it's all together. It's all one and the same. And then he says, mercy and truth are necessarily found in all of God's works. If mercy be taken to mean the removal of any kind of defect, whatever is done by him in created things is done according to proper order and proportion wherein consists the idea of justice. Thus, justice must exist in all of God's works. And this is one of the things that I think that we have to kind of check ourselves on with the divine mercy, is that I think that we sometimes might think that God is pouring out his divine mercy on all these poor, wretched sinners, right? And he does. I mean, he certainly does. But the thing is that his very disposition, his very self, his very being is mercy, okay? So he's constantly pouring out mercy and justice on all of humanity, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, okay? So it's not like he's turning it off and on. and saying, okay, I'm now going to be merciful to this person because they just sinned. It's a disposition of who he is. He is mercy. He is justice, right? Now, the next one is kind of cool, and this one kind of surprised me, okay? He says in the next slide here, now the work of divine justice always presupposes the work of mercy and is founded thereupon. Okay, so if you go back to what he was saying about, smiting the sinner, and the sinners have to spend eternity in hell, and it doesn't matter if they have works of mercy or if they're humans. Okay, so now he's saying justice presupposes mercy. So kind of in the order of things, the mercy comes first. It's almost like, it's what's most significant, I guess you could say, is his mercy. Okay, and that's where I think the devotion of divine mercy is built upon teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas, because this is like, it almost comes in a sense before justice. Like his mercy triumphs over his justice in a sense, if you want to say it that way. Although, like I said a moment ago, they're kind of one and the same thing. Okay, so we're trying to analyze God through a very limited human intelligence and perspective, all right? For nothing is due to creatures except for something pre-existing in them or foreknown. Again, this is due to a creature. It must be due on account of something that precedes. And since we cannot go on to infinity, we must come to something that depends only on the goodness and divine will, which is the ultimate end. Okay, so the disposition of God towards human creatures is mercy, is justice, and he has as his end to relieve us of our misery because he's goodness and he loves us, but he still at the same time is not going to take away our free will. So he's going to allow us to sin. He's going to allow us to do crazy and stupid things, but from his perspective, it's justice presupposing mercy. Okay, does that make sense? I hope so. Okay, next thing. In every work of God, viewed as its primary source, there appears mercy. Okay? If you take that literally, every single work of God presupposes mercy. Okay? So this is where I think you see that image of divine mercy where the rays are coming out of Jesus's heart, and those rays are just constantly flowing out. And so the mercy is just infinite, and it's constantly being poured out upon all of humanity, because this is a very significant attribute of God. Okay, in all that follows, the power of mercy remains and works indeed with even greater force, as the influence of the first cause is more intense than that of second causes. Seems to imply that mercy is the first thing, although there's really no chronology with God, right? For this reason does God, out of abundance of his goodness, bestow upon creatures what is due to them more bountifully than is proportionate to their deserts, since less would suffice for preserving the order of justice than what the divine goodness confers, because between creatures and God goodness there can be no proportion. And I think what he's saying here is that through our sin, we deserve to be punished eternally. But God, in his mercy, has allowed us so many opportunities to be reconciled with him. Okay, through his grace, through the sacraments, through the church, being able to go to confession. And that's why I think, every time we go to confession, we should just come out of confession just praising God and being so thankful and so excited, because he's provided the remedy, okay? And the remedy lasts our entire lives. Until the moment we die, we're never outside of his mercy. There's always a remedy, regardless of what sin we commit, okay? And I think that's what he's getting at here. The justice presupposes mercy, and God is going out of his way to redeem us, to save us. Okay, well, what about those articles we read about earlier? But he's not going to take away our free will. So if in the end we die in a state of mortal sin, that's basically where the mercy ends. Okay, and since the mercy and justice are the same thing, in his mercy and justice, we have to be punished eternally. Okay, and it doesn't come to an end regardless of who we are or what we've done other than the fact that we died in a state of mortal sin. Okay, so that should be an eye-opener, right? So anyways, okay, so let me just take a break and say that if you are watching now and you have any comments, or if this is making sense or not making sense, or if it's too deep or not deep enough, let me know. And Sissel, I don't know if you have any thoughts on anything that I've said, or I think we may have scared Amy away.
She's like, I am done.
She's like, I threw in my comment. I am out of here.
All right. I'm just working on getting quick on the camera switching over here.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you've got a lot of stuff on your mind.
To do over
there,
here. And I'm
you?
also making a mental list of things we need to work on. The studio quite literally just got finished putting together this morning, and there's still lots of lights and things to be added. But, I was thinking about when you were asking me about my experience with mercy, I think I had also coming from Protestantism, the word, not the word in this particular circumstance, mercy was used, but there's the whole once saved, always saved kind of thing that you can fall into in the Protestant churches. And that's where like you get baptized, you've been saved. It's okay if you don't like go to go to Sunday service every week. It's okay if you don't pray every day. If you maybe live life not totally to the way that God wants you to, but it's okay. You were saved. You're covered. And I think that would be like going the wrong way with how kind of Aquinas is saying that's not mercy. That's not what it's talking about.
That's where I think that that first set of articles that I showed would come in very handy, because that's clearly not a once saved, always saved. What he's saying is if you die in the state of mortal sin, you are going to be punished eternally. And so I think that kind of shoots down that whole idea of once saved, always saved. And I think it's a dangerous teaching, because it gives people a very, very false sense of security that really they just have to have one declaration of faith, and then they're going to be on easy street for the rest of their life, and regardless of what they do after that. So that's not so. That is no bueno for sure. Okay, so the last article I want to share is, going much further into the Suma, where now he's talking about virtues. And this is more from our perspective, and I find it very interesting because he says, is mercy the greatest of the virtues? And one thing that Thomas Aquinas loves to do in the Summa, and I think I've talked about this before, he loves to order things. What is the order of the angels? What's the order
I heard
of the...
order, and I was thinking Amazon. He goes to order things.
No, not that. The Amazon didn't exist back then. So, what's the greatest of the angels? What's the greatest of the theological virtues? What's the greatest of the intellectual virtues, And so he asks a lot, what's the greatest virtue? And most people would say, well, it's charity. And Thomas would agree it's charity. But so now you say, well, okay, if he's already established that charity is the greatest of virtues, why is he asking here, is mercy the greatest of the virtues? Because he is going to make a distinction here about, in one way, mercy is the greatest virtue. Okay? Now, this is kind of interesting here. He says a virtue may take precedence of others in two ways. First, in itself. Secondly, in comparison with its subject. In itself, mercy takes precedence of other virtues, for it belongs to mercy to be bountiful to others and, what is more, to succor others in their want, which pertains chiefly to one who stands above. Hence, mercy is accounted to be proper to God, and therein his omnipotence is declared to be chiefly manifested. Okay, so he's saying it's a very, very high virtue because it has to do with helping people who are below you. All right, so now the next thing, and this is the last slide that I'll show, he says, on the other hand, with regard to its subject, mercy is not the greatest virtue unless that subject be greater than all others, surpassed by none and excelling all. Since for him that has anyone above him, it is better to be united to that which is above than to supply the defect of that which is beneath. Okay, so I think what he's saying here is that since we are not the highest of all beings, and we have something that's higher than us, which is God, and we can't have mercy on God, and we can't have mercy on angels because they're higher than us, then there has to be a virtue that unites us with something higher than us, and that virtue is charity. Okay, so the greatest virtue that we can exercise would be charity, because it has to do with us, uniting ourselves to God, who is the highest being of all, and that's the highest virtue. But he says, hence as regard man who has God above him, charity which unites him to God is greater than mercy, whereby he supplies the defects of his neighbor. But of all the virtues which relate to our neighbor, mercy is the greatest, even as its act surpasses all others, since it belongs to one who is higher and better to supply the defect of another, insofar as the latter is deficient. Okay, so he's saying here, in regard to our neighbor, in regard to our fellow human beings, the greatest thing that we can do is to have mercy on them. Okay, and I also don't think that he's talking about like individual acts of mercy. I think he's talking about a disposition of mercy, a disposition which would be directly linked to love and compassion and all the other things that would relate to the love that we have of our neighbor. Okay, so imagine if everybody had mercy on everybody else, and everybody would forgive each other, and everybody would not take offense, and they'd give everybody the benefit of the doubt. That would be a pretty good world to live in. Okay, so that's why, according to this, the greatest of all the virtues in regard to us and God is charity, and then mercy would be much, much lower than that. But when it has to do with our relationship to our fellow man, it's going to be mercy, which is the greatest one. Okay.
Also, our friend Amy is still here.
Oh,
she
okay.
She said haha when we were talking about her leaving. And then she says mercy for a neighbor is greater than love of neighbor.
Mercy. Yeah, okay.
Same, yeah.
Okay,
she's saying they are the same. Sorry, I saw the greater symbol and I was never mind.
Yeah, I saw that. I was trying to make sense of that as well. Okay, so she's saying mercy for neighbor is greater than love of neighbor, or are they the same? Yeah, I think and that's the thing is that, and this is something that people have to understand also, is that when we talk about charity as a theological virtue, it has to do with our relationship with God. Okay, it's infused in us. And I'm kind of going a roundabout answer to your question, Amy, but I will get to it, I promise. Okay? And so love otherwise is a passion, okay? And love, and we can love somebody, and then we can have mercy as a virtue for them. And so I think ultimately the mercy and the love would be intertwined with each other, okay? Because it would be very hard to have. Can you imagine having, I don't know if Amy's a parent or not, but your kid does something really stupid. I've got teenage kids, and I've got a son who, and like me, we all do stupid stuff. But when they do something stupid, and let's say they're not even deserving of the mercy because what they did was so stupid, but you still have mercy on them. How could that be without love? The love and the mercy would have to be intertwined with each other. Okay, but and ultimately it's related to our love of God, because we love our neighbor and we love our children, and we love our spouse and everything because they're made in the image and likeness of God, and so we love them because we love God, right? And ultimately the greatest love is going to be the one that we have for God, but that's going to kind of trickle down into all of our relationships and the way we treat people, and ultimately so it made sense.
Yes, it made sense to Amy. So
has anybody ever said that on the show before?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think I've ever said that before on the show. I'm going to be honest.
So, all right, for the first time, I have made sense. Okay, maybe
good.
it's the new equipment. Maybe that's helping me to make sense, right?
I'm not making sense is what's happening over here.
Okay. Well, Amy WC, thank you so much for your comments. We're glad you're with us. I don't know where. I'd be curious to know, if you don't mind giving us one more comment, where are you watching us from? If you just say what state or what country or whatever. Where, if you want to identify where you are, we'd really appreciate that very much, because we've had some international viewers on this.
Yes,
so we've had people from different parts of the country. We've had people call in and all that. So we'd love to know where you are. And, of course, a lot of people are going to be watching this program on a recorded basis. We do this live most Fridays during the 1 o'clock Central hour.
We got another comment. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. Oh, wow. Look at that. Okay. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Sissel.
Oh, no, you're totally fine. I was just like, I got excited. That's all. We have first off, Amy says she's from Huntsville, Alabama.
Oh,
that's where
wow.
our friend Marty's from, is where he's at right now anyway. And then Holy Face Miracle, that's the YouTube handle, also commented and said, I'm so happy to be here with you today. And I am in Midland, Ontario, Canada. I thought they said when it said Midland, I was going to be like Midland, Texas, but Midland, Ontario, Canada. That's super cool. So thanks so much for joining us.
You know, I used to live in Mississippi, and so I'm familiar with Alabama. Huntsville, Alabama is way up north. And Amy can correct me, but they have like an aerospace center there. There's something there because I remember one of my friends, her dad was actually a rocket scientist. You know how they say that, like, well, you know, you're no rocket scientist, and so they used to joke around, and he'd say, well, I actually am a rocket scientist.
That's hilarious.
So okay.
Oh, by the way, okay. Now the handle is making a little bit more sense now. I'm pretty sure. You have to correct me if I'm wrong. Is this Alan Smith?
Yeah.
Who does the segment on Morning Joy? With all about isn't it? It's called Bishop Sheen Today. Is that
Bishop Sheen Today?
Bishop Sheen Today. Awesome. So thanks so much for joining us. We love that segment, of course, as well. Dave and I each have a segment on Morning Joy. We're the early risers together.
Well, we've got 3 of the 5 contributors here gathered here.
This is like a mini Morning Joy reunion. It's morning afternoon. Morning after a few cups of coffee.
Afternoon joy is what it is, right?
Yeah. Afternoon after more coffee.
So Alan does Thursdays, Sissel does Wednesdays, I do Tuesdays. And then we have Julie Carrick on Fridays
and
Monsignor Pope on Mondays. So if you guys, no pressure, but, you know, if you're not joining us, maybe you want to jump on. And
every morning, 6 to 7:30 a.m. Central.
All right. So Amy's clarifying here. NASA and Lockheed Martin are here about to trip over rocket scientists here while walking around.
Over the rocket science.
Everywhere you go, there's a rocket scientist.
That's hilarious.
Okay. So, so if you ever thought about marrying a rocket scientist, you just hang around Huntsville, Alabama.
Perfect. That was honestly, when I made my list of things that I wanted my future husband to have, rocket scientist skills was top.
All the conversations about rocket science around the dinner table.
I know that I would be so on top of that and know exactly, because I don't get confused when my friend talks about helicopters. So, you know.
And a very good friend of mine works for Lockheed Martin here in North Texas, Amy. So, all right. So I sure went on a few tangents there, didn't I? Talking about NASA and all those kind of things. But I guess the bottom line, if I were to kind of summarize, and anybody that wants to jump in can do so if you've been watching the show, is that I think, you know, St. Thomas Aquinas gave, 750 years ago, a very traditional teaching on what it means for God to have mercy. And I think he took it from a very high level perspective of God being, God is, God's justice and mercy, his infinity, his wisdom, his goodness, his love. It's all really one and the same. And he's constantly pouring that out upon us. And then the mercy really is very principal as an aspect of God, and the justice presupposes mercy. And so I think that teaching kind of led to the fact that Jesus, perhaps in the early 20th century, realized that there was a great misunderstanding of God's mercy. And perhaps Jesus was even saying, he had said to Thomas, "You have spoken well of me. What would you like as your reward?" And Thomas said, "And nothing but thee, my Lord." And maybe Jesus, in his infinite wisdom, said, maybe we need to simplify this. Maybe I need to be a little bit more clear, and maybe I come down to Sister Faustina and through her really emphasize something that Aquinas was doing at a very high level, and maybe it needs to be brought down so that it's my love and my mercy is better understood. Okay, that's why I don't think they're incompatible with each other. And even those articles I showed earlier where, the people who die in mortal sin, are they really going to be punished eternally? Yes. And again, that's not incongruent or inconsistent with his mercy. So bottom line is you can take Thomas's teaching, and you can take John Paul II's and Faustina and what Jesus revealed to Faustina. And since Alan's here, Bishop Fulton Sheen.
Yes. Who apparently really loved St. Thomas Aquinas, and his doctoral thesis was based on his writings. Archbishop Fulton Sheen.
Okay, Fulton Sheen loved St. Thomas Aquinas. His doctoral thesis was based on his writings. Okay, God and Intelligence was the title of his first book. God and Intelligence. Wow. I would love to read that. I haven't read a lot of Sheen, and Alan would be interested in knowing that when I first got into Catholic radio, I met a gentleman, and he said, "Can we meet for breakfast?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." He said, "I want to give you something," and we met. And he said, this gentleman, I don't remember his name. He said back in I think early to mid 70s, because Sheen died in 79. He said, this is that guy speaking. He said, I was a seminarian at Holy Trinity Seminary in Irving, Texas. And Archbishop Sheen came and did a retreat. And he says, I was in charge of recording all of Sheen's talks. So he said, I worked with Sheen, and he said the level of precision, the level of exactness, the attention to detail, him saying, okay, at this point, I'm going to emphasize this, and you want to make sure you get this. And he gave me a copy of all of those talks. In fact, maybe I could share them with Alan Smith sometime, the retreat that Fulton Sheen did. But I thought, that was my closest connection, is to, talk to somebody in person who had been there with Sheen, worked with Sheen. And
my dad thought he was Superman. Because of his I can't remember, what is the name of that particular piece of cloth the like a bishop was wearing. He said the way he's wearing like a red cape, right?
Okay.
And so my dad thought he was Superman on the TV.
Oh yeah. And he won an Emmy back in the 1950s, and he said, famously, I'd like to and Alan's like, I know all this stuff, but maybe Amy doesn't know this, but he said, I'd like to thank my writers, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, that's what he said. And,
so great.
And he, that was back when you had like 4 options for TV, and to get on a TV show, you had to be really, really good. Now, anybody can get on TV, and perhaps I'm proving that today because I'm on, TV, but
it's very old. I don't know if I said that right, but I think that's what he's saying, is that's what it's called.
Oh, okay.
Oh, he's going to send a PDF copy of God and Intelligence. Perfect.
Okay, so do you want to get us caught up on some of these? There's a few more comments
for
here.
sure. We have Amy said she was listening to a program this morning about Divine Mercy Weekend. Hold on a second, I gotta switch the camera. There we go. Divine Mercy Weekend. Briefly, was almost like a check off list about what to do to make it to heaven. First Fridays, scapulars, etc. It seemed a little too sealed up, legal, and guaranteed. St. Thomas is a nice counterbalance to that.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, there's a lot of beautiful devotions that certainly help us on our way to heaven, but it also doesn't mean that if you do these things, I think we know lots of people. There's lots of people who go to daily mass, who do all the things, they pray a rosary daily, but they really are not maybe actually on the right path for they're not doing all the things truly, and so that's very true. So it's a good balance.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the ultimate question we all have to ask ourselves, and everything else is secondary, is how do I get to heaven? And, what do I need to, air quotes, do to get to heaven? And, that's fundamentally the question. We have to respond to God's grace. We have to, we obviously, from a negative standpoint, not fall into mortal sin. But what Rick Paulini, and I think this is what Amy was talking about, because I heard that same interview. It was on the Next Right Thing with Debbie and Adam this morning. Is Rick Paulini was saying that the graces that are available on Divine Mercy Sunday, he compared to baptism. He said it's not baptism because you can only be baptized once, but basically you're like if you had never been baptized and you are baptized and then a strike of lightning hits you and you die, you are going to go to heaven.
Yeah,
now, assuming in that
split second, I didn't think something awful that was.
Because I was going to say you go down and get hit by a truck, but I'm not sure what thoughts or
on my way to being hit by
about, the people you work with are going to get into your head while you're on their way down.
I may have definitely attended a big baptism ceremony at one of my cousin's churches, Protestant churches, growing up, and they definitely had a lady there who was getting baptized a second time because she loved the feeling of being rebaptized.
Yeah,
it was weird.
Oh yeah, she just likes to.
Yeah, it was
you
weird.
know, and I will. You know, what you talked about, once saved, always saved.
Yes.
And I think the reason why a lot of people subscribe to that is that it's simple, it's easy, and it also is very convenient. You know, because I would love, to say, for example, I'd like to do something and guarantee that the rest of my life with my wife and my kids is going to be absolutely perfect. But it doesn't work that way. You know, it's a constant, working it out and going from one day to the next and trying to persevere. And I think that's more the Catholic position than saying it's kind of a quick fix. Because even with divine mercy, even if you do all the things that are necessary to get that, it's not. Rick said it's not an indulgence. It's a grace that one can be, gotten rid of all sin and the effects of sin. But then you can go out the next moment and sin mortally and be damned to hell.
Well, that's why it's
right?
it's all about living your life every single day, trying to get on that path to heaven in all aspects of your life, and not just fulfilling requirements. Those things are giving you such grace to be able to fight those, the temptation of sin, but it doesn't automatically mean, boom, you're golden.
Yeah.
There's no, just like many things in life, there's no easy ticket out of out of this.
So if you're in an elevator and you got 20 seconds and somebody says, what do I need to do to get to heaven? What would you say?
Yeah. Well, I'd say that you need to evaluate your life, evaluate God's commandments, and recognize where you are failing in that way. Pray to God daily, and go to Mass and receive the sacraments frequently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, obviously weekly on Mass, but even more than that.
Sorry, the door opened. The guy left.
But
no, that's all right.
I hope that situation doesn't happen, because apparently I don't think I'm ready for it.
Yeah, right. But it's so. And again, I don't. We probably all have that answer. At the ready.
I agree.
I think it certainly would have to do with responding to God's grace, and that's where we and the Protestants, I think, would agree with each other that it's sola gratia. It's all God's initiative, but in responding to God's grace, and also. I think there would need to be a certain surrender, and of course believing in God and responding to His grace and living a life of holiness and virtue. Okay, that might be my answer. Okay.
Okay,
so,
yours sounded a little bit prettier, but it's okay.
I'm gonna give
fine.
you a B+ and me an A-. Okay, I'm sorry. No, I'm kidding.
Okay.
All right. Well, that's going to do it. I'm so grateful for the folks who joined us today. And if, as I started to talk about earlier and then got sidetracked, believe it or not, if you are watching this on a recorded basis and you like this, well then, by golly, join us for the live broadcast every Friday at 1 o'clock Central Time. I say every now and then we don't do it, but we'd love to join us live, because then you can comment and you can interact with us like Alan and Amy were doing today. And if you want to comment after the fact, we have an email address that comes to both me and to Sissel, and it's backtothefather@grnonline.com. backtothefather@grnonline.com. I do want to take 1 minute, because the name of the show, if you're a new viewer, may be like, what does that mean? Sounds like, Michael J. Fox and Back to the Future or something. But and it ties.
The amount of times that we said Back to the Future that when we first started the show,
I never do that any longer.
No, but it was really bad at the beginning. We both would say Back to the Future.
But one time, not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, I was talking to somebody about the movie, and instead of saying Back to the Future, I said Back to the Father. So now it's
and then you're like, speaking of Back to the Father, let me give you a little plug.
Yeah, right. Well, Fridays at 1 o'clock. So, but Back to the Father implies and means that we were created by God, we're in the world, and then God he draws us back to Himself. Okay, so the goal of life is to return to the Father. The mission of Jesus Christ was to reveal the Father to the world, right? And so it's really, you talk about, what's the purpose of grace? What's the purpose of mercy? it's so that we don't, miss miss that train heading back to the Father at the end of our lives. So, anyways, again, thank you for watching. Sissel, thanks for pushing all the buttons and keeping things afloat.
Not pushing your buttons, thankfully, right?
And anyways, thanks again to everybody for watching. I don't think we have an outro,
No.
so we're just going to have a cold exit, but we're going to continue to improve upon the technology, the set, the look, and all that kind of good stuff. God bless you, and have a wonderful, beautiful celebration of Divine Mercy Sunday this Sunday. Then our Lord have mercy on us.